music was there for my students on 9/11. And I remember the seventh grade band, every classroom had the television on, and we had the television on, and we saw this stuff happen live, but the students just wanted to play music. And in seventh grade, we were on Essential Elements 2000 Book 2, and number 6 is America in E flat major in 3/4. And we must have played America 10, 12 times in a row. In the 8th grade band, we had passed out an arrangement of Amazing Grace a few days before 9/11, and I think we just played Amazing Grace the whole class. And the only time they had the opportunity to truly express in a way that we couldn't process with words.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, Matthew Arau. Hi, Matthew.
Hey, Mark. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. So I appreciate coming on the show. You were recommended to me by Kathy Leibinger. You have a connection, of course. You're at ABC, involved in that. And so I'm really happy to have you come on the show and share your story.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy, for the opportunity.
I joke with Kathy that she seems to know everybody in the band world.
I think that's probably true.
All right, Matthew, if you can introduce yourself for the guests, tell everyone what you're doing and where you're from and all that stuff.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Dr. Matthew Arau, and I'm the Associate Director of Bands at Lawrence Conservatory of Music and the Chair of Music Education in Appleton, Wisconsin. And I live with my wife, Marilee, in Neenah, Wisconsin, just outside of Appleton. And I'm also a Conselmer education clinician. And I'm on the conducting faculty for the American Band College of Central Washington University and on the staff of the Western International Band Clinic. And in addition to my work in conducting and education and being the conductor of the symphonic band at Lawrence and guest conductor of the symphony orchestra and wind ensemble and faculty chamber ensemble, I also have a passion for teaching leadership and leading professional development for staff and working with students and teachers around the country and around the world.
Excellent. So, Matthew, that's a lot of stuff to unpack over the course of this interview, so I'm looking forward to it.
Great.
Can we start with your origin story? How'd you get involved in music in your early days as a child?
Yeah, I love that question because I think fondly back to my childhood, and I'm filled with gratitude for the support from my parents for my curiosity and creativity as a young boy. I remember as a 5-year-old, my first experiences with music were playing the tennis racket was my electric guitar, and I started writing lyrics to songs around 5 or 6 years old. I remember my first song when I was 5 was "I Would Like to Be a Gardener," and it had so much passion that I would do whatever I could to become a gardener. And I formed a band. In fact, I was the only member, and I called the band the Annual Flames. And then my younger brother Javier, when he was old enough, when he was 5, I asked him to become the drummer of the band, and we didn't have any drums, so we went to Baskin Robbins 31 Flavors ice cream store and got some of those empty ice cream tubs and flipped those upside down, and those became drums, and the drumsticks were chopsticks. And so Javier was the drummer, I was the electric tennis racket player, and we had band concerts. Our rock band was called the Annual Flames, and it started off as a garage band. And anyways, that's my origin. When I was 7, I started playing piano and loved that. But when I started on the saxophone, when I was 9, that's where I felt like I found my true calling. I remember being in 2nd grade. There was a school assembly at Mariemont Elementary School in Sacramento, California. And I was sitting on the cafetorium floor, and there was a 6th grade Dixieland band playing. And it absolutely blew my mind. And I'm sure if I went back in time and heard these 6th graders, it would still blow my mind. But these were local musicians. And I remember the saxophonist, Kyle O'Brien. And I wanted to be like Kyle. And so when I had the opportunity to choose an instrument 2 years later, I chose the saxophone and absolutely loved it. And that was really my entryway into band. And just continued to work at it. I tried out for the junior high jazz band in 7th grade, which I really wanted to make, and I didn't make it. And my mom asked the band director, Wayne Reimers, what Matthew should do, what I should do to get better at the saxophone. She recommended I take private saxophone lessons with a great teacher, Mark Tolga. And I started lessons with him, and he really put me on the pathway to growing as a musician. And jazz played a huge role in my life. And that's really how it started.
So Matthew, you mentioned that you had supportive parents and you formed the pretend band with your brother. What was that environment like? How did your parents support you? Can you recall specifically?
Well, I remember that different styles of music were being played on records all the time at home, and a lot of the Jackson 5 was a big influence of mine growing up. I also know my grandfather listened to classical music. So when we would visit Los Angeles, I heard a lot of classical, but we attended a lot of cultural festivals that had music from all over the world. And we always attended the Sacramento International Dixieland Jubilee every Memorial weekend. And I got to hear incredible jazz groups. And I think that really fed my passion for jazz music at a young age. Also, my older sister plays flute and she was in the band. My older brother played trumpet in the band. So I was really raised in a band family. And I looked up to my older siblings and wanted to be like them. So I think that played a huge role. And just in terms of the creativity, my parents were always encouraging. I think how lucky I was, because they could have said, what are you doing with that tennis racket? But they just encouraged me, and I'm grateful for that.
So Matthew, in addition to these, those of us who know California know the program where you went to high school at Rio Americano High School. It's well known for its jazz program. Can you tell me about your experiences there?
Yeah, I'm just eternally grateful that my family made the move from Los Angeles up to Sacramento, so that I was fortunate enough to attend Rio Americano High School. I also have to credit the junior high band director, Wayne Reimers at Arden Junior High, who was a fantastic teacher. And I think all of us that went to Arden were set up so well. We were playing incredibly advanced music. I remember in 7th grade playing Variations on the Korean Folk Song by John Barnes Chance as a 7th grader, and not really thinking about it. I think we knew it was challenging because we had a lot of chair challenges on that piece, but I think we didn't compare ourselves to other schools, so we didn't know that maybe that was beyond the norm.
Sure.
But that was outstanding, and so we had a good start from junior high, and then high school. Jazz was really special. Our band director, Craig Fagnani, was an outstanding director. And what I remember a lot of band rehearsals was a lot of singing. We just would always sing the music and sing it first before playing, and a lot of call and response for style. And improvisation was such a natural part of being in the group. A lot of the students took private lessons, which of course was helpful, but there was just a culture and vibe of it's okay to take risks and be courageous. And I recall that Craig Fagnani's, one of his greatest influence was the Tower of Power. And so we would listen to Tower of Power and just listen to how tight the ensemble was. And so that became a goal for us to play at that level.
Mm-hmm.
I started my own Dixieland band. We actually were featured on the Mickey Mouse Club.
No way.
And that was a defining time for me because we were selected as the top youth Dixieland group in the nation. Because I got later involved with student leadership, maybe those were some of the seeds of where Craig Fagnani just supported us in starting student-led groups, and we just did it. So maybe we can talk about that.
So how did that come about? I mean, how did he sort of inspire you to create that Dixieland group?
Well, there was already a culture at Rio of student-led jazz combos. And so the idea of starting a Dixieland band didn't seem unusual or out of the ordinary. In fact, it seemed perfectly natural since we were in Sacramento and here was the world's largest Dixieland jazz festival was there. And so while I also was leading a jazz combo, I also simultaneously, my sophomore year, started a Dixieland band. And we signed up to be part of the Dixieland Jubilee. There's a youth band element, of the Dixieland Jubilee. And so we signed up. You had to send in an audition tape. And there was the Sacramento Traditional Jazz Society, which was a group of adults that supported Dixieland jazz and really encouraged the youth to get involved. So there was a support system already. And our very first festival that we performed at, and the group was a collection of my good band friends, and we performed, and we were so fortunate to get newspaper coverage of the Sacramento Bee, and I think it was actually the cover of the paper. A news reporter came in and watched us perform our set, and we got incredible coverage. It was just the luck of the draw. And so that was our first year, and the group was called the Midnight Junction Jazz, and it really ended up taking off. I just have to credit the high school band director, Craig Fagnani, for just being supportive and letting us do our thing. He provided space after school for us to rehearse, but it was purely a student-led group. And thinking that later on in my life, I became so involved and interested in student leadership, perhaps those are some of the seeds. One of the most exciting things that happened with this Dixieland group was one day when I was coming home from track and field practice after school, I found out that I had a special phone call that somebody had called for me, and I was wondering, who was it? When I got home, I found out that it was the producer of Disney.
Oh my goodness!
Had called, and I couldn't believe it was real. And somebody, the producer from Disney, called and said they had heard about my Dixieland band. And they wondered if I would be interested in auditioning to perform on the Mickey Mouse Club show on TV. The interesting thing is I was raised without television, so I actually didn't even know what the Mickey Mouse Club show was. And then I quickly found out, and we put together an audition video and sent it in, and we were selected out of the whole country to be flown to Orlando to perform at MGM Studios. And we performed there for a full day. They brought in a studio audience, and it was really exciting. The week before we were there, Milli Vanilli had been performing an interview, which in retrospect is really funny. But we performed a shortened version of Sweet Georgia Brown. And that was a highlight to be interviewed by the Mouseketeers. And I was 16 years old at the time. But beyond that, I think some of the highlights of playing in the Rio Americano Jazz Group were the other opportunities that unfolded, including performing as the lead alto of the Monterey Jazz Festival High School All-Star Jazz Band, which toured Japan. And I had the opportunity to do that 2 summers in a row. And I think that my experience in Japan was transformative in my idea of what was possible with band. And it elevated this idea beyond any possibility of potential. Meaning, I heard junior high concert bands perform music at an incredible level. We did exchange concerts with the jazz ensemble, and then in middle school, concert bands would perform, and they were mind-blowing. And I've always had that image in my mind of what's possible. And I think that we have no idea what's possible. We keep blowing apart the ceiling of what's possible. And that's what I love about having had that experience. beyond that, I had the opportunity to perform with Dizzy Gillespie the year before he died, center stage at Monterey Jazz Festival, and I'm grateful every day for that opportunity.
So these are exceptional experiences. I was going to ask, how did your directors inspire you? How do your experiences carry forward in your career? It sounds like you have a pretty clear idea, but can we talk about that a little bit more? How are these experiences informing you as a professor and the chair of the music ed department at Lawrence?
I think my belief in students and what they're capable of must have been influenced by my younger years, being parts of these performances that maybe defy gravity, defy expectations, defy odds. So when I had the opportunity to teach young students, to work with them, or to lead professional development with music teachers, I'm always trying to find ways to raise our belief systems and raise our expectations, because I find when our belief in our students elevates, that we're able to find strategies to meet students where they're at. We're also able to elevate self-belief in students so that they reach beyond what they ever thought was possible.
That's really interesting. So do you have any advice or tangible ways we can put this in action if we're a band director? What can we do to help raise the expectations, even when it seems like it's an impossible thing to meet? That's
a great question. And of course, it's always on an individual basis, depending on one situation and the challenges of a particular program. I find some of the greatest challenges are when a director is new to the program, and there's a culture that's already been established, and there's an allegiance to the prior director. And for those first months and year and maybe beyond, there's always that comment of like, that's not the way we do it. We've always done it this way. And making those changes can be a challenge. The way I try to look at life is that a challenge becomes an opportunity. And so if we come into a program that we want to elevate the standards, we need to create stepping stones of success, like small measurable achievements, like one segment of a rehearsal where through a 10-minute segment, we're able to create something extraordinary, something beautiful, something that the students clearly can see that they've improved, and then revel in that and celebrate that so that the students want to have more moments like that to build upon. And I find that if we think of the long game, but also the short game, that's I really think of the idea of stepping stones, like one stepping stone at a time, building upon that, building upon success. Our students want to be successful, so they need to feel success. Sometimes the issue is that we'll take too much of a leap at first, and then the students will experience like massive failure. And what we want to do is build upon success, so they want more of it.
Yeah, there's a couple things you said in there are really great, is that idea of building upon small successes, but this requires having a pretty good idea of where you want to go and how you're going to get there. And so do you have any thoughts about sort of creating that long-term plan for success? Let's say you take a new job at a middle school and it's a program that's maybe down a little bit. What would your sort of advice be for that director to kind of chart that path?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm a huge believer in finding purpose and finding meaning. And as somebody that enters the program and they have this foresight or vision of what they want it to become, let's say it's a 5-year plan. Let's start with a 5-year plan. And you need to have the image in your mind of what you want to create in order to head there. I think that vision and purpose are critical for leadership. And so we need to already have that image, but we also have to believe that it's possible. And I think that belief is oftentimes the missing element. I think sometimes we give up before we even begin or before we even try. So I think knowing that it is possible, and then approaching that 5-year plan, breaking it down to yearly goals. And now let's look at just that first year. That first year, we're going to have to find a balance between not changing too much from the year before, but making incremental changes which will set up the program for success and growth. We're also building support along the way. So we're building connections with administration and networking and building relationships, because that going to be key support for us. We start reaching out to the community, because the community is going to be such a central piece in supporting us down the line, particularly financially, as we want to bring in more instruments to the program. If we want to do more outreach and increase the numbers of the program, those relationships are really key. But I find having a long-term vision and then setting up the stepping stones towards getting there can be key. I'm also a huge believer in finding mentors and asking for help. Asking for help may be the most important thing that a young teacher or a teacher of any age, you just need to do it. And often I find that we're afraid to ask for help because we don't want to invite somebody into our program to show all the warts and the imperfections. But that's why we bring somebody in you trust, that's just going to help you, because that's what a mentor wants to do, is just provide help. And I would not be where I am today without the unbelievable mentors that have come into my life and continue to come into my life to this day.
Yeah, no, it's these are really important things to think about, this idea of having a plan. But I like what you said about having a vision, knowing what it means, or knowing what the success is going to look like for your school. Because we're not all going to be in, Flower Mound or Carmel or these towns with these huge high school programs, middle school programs. But we can, in our small town or in our small independent school, we can still have a vision of what success looks like in that context.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So Matthew, let's talk about how you got to where you are now. As we've already mentioned, you're at Lawrence University, and so you have some teaching experience and you have some graduate work, but we haven't even talked about how you started. So let's talk about your university and then into your first teaching jobs, if that's okay with you.
Oh, I'd love to. My journey to Lawrence is interesting. Growing up in California, I didn't have my sights necessarily of going to college in Wisconsin. It wasn't really something that was on my mind. In fact, I was really into academics in high school, and I wasn't necessarily sure that I was going to even major in music, interestingly enough. So many of the colleges I ended up applying to were really strong schools in the social sciences. And I was having a conversation with my Uncle George, and he said, you should apply to Lawrence. It's an incredible liberal arts school where you can also major in music, a great double degree program. And I'm grateful to him that he encouraged me to apply to Lawrence because he was absolutely right about both of those things. And I visited Lawrence as a high school senior, met the saxophone professor, the jazz director, and the head of the government department, which ended up being one of my majors there as well. So I went to Lawrence to pursue a double degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Government, which is like political science, and a Bachelor of Music in Music Performance with an emphasis in jazz studies. And this was 1991, and this was the first year that emphasis in jazz studies was offered at Lawrence. And that was very fortunate for me. But while I was at Lawrence, I fell in love with classical music. And the saxophone professor who's still there is Stephen Jordheim, and just an unbelievable player. He had won the World Saxophone Competition the last time it had been held in Geneva, Switzerland, and just incredible sound. And so I ended up adding classical music performance to my degree program. And I was really torn between what I was going to do with my life. And I remember wrestling with, am I going to go to law school or be a political science professor or a professional jazz musician? And I remember one time I was at a saxophone lesson with Steve Jordheim, and I said, Professor Jordheim, I'm not sure what to do with my life. And he said, well, what do you love the most, Matthew? And I said, well, I really love teaching and I love performing. And he said, Matthew, you should be a music teacher. I said, really? He said, yeah. And that sparked the idea of me pursuing music education. So it's just amazing that how these conversations and how mentorship can change our trajectory. And I'm so grateful for that he saw something in me that maybe I didn't see in myself yet at that point. And so it was in my student teaching experience where I was actually student teaching U.S. history, civics, high school band, and middle school band simultaneously. And it was in the moment of rehearsing Irish Tune from County Derry, Percy Granger, the high school wind ensemble, that changed my life. And it was in that concert, it was in that performance. And I remember just the rehearsals leading to that, how we listened to choral versions and different versions. We talked about the meaning of the work, the evolution of the melody to eventually, becoming Danny Boy and what that means to people in Ireland. And I remember this incredible emotional supercharge in the performance, conducting, and the connection with the musicians. And we just felt so connected. And I noticed some tears in some of the musicians' eyes as they were feeling the emotion of the piece. And performing on the saxophone had always been my first love. But in that moment, I realized that there was a whole other emotional aspect of music making that happens in the process and in the connection of conducting. And that's where I truly fell in love with conducting. And I was 22 years old. Yeah, so that was my student teaching. I was actually at Lawrence University for 6 years to complete what was a quadruple major.
Holy cow.
Double degree with dual certification in political science and music education.
You're a bit of an overachiever, aren't you?
There were so many administrators and that would see me in my 6th year and just laugh. They'd say, "Matthew, you could have a master's by now." And I knew they were right. But yeah, it took me a while to really figure out what I was meant to do. But when I found out what I was meant to do, which was to be a music teacher, it really changed everything.
Yeah. And so you then taught, now where did you end up teaching high school and middle school?
Yeah. So actually my career began in Colorado. So Lawrence University is in Appleton, Wisconsin. And there was a professor at Lawrence named Nick Keelan who had been a high school band director in Colorado. And he always spoke just reverently about teaching in Colorado. And so I decided to apply for positions all along the Front Range and in the mountains in Colorado. And I went out there over my spring break and fell in love with the state as I was driving, watching the sun set over the Rocky Mountains from the main highway. It was just, oh my gosh, this is heaven on earth. And I accepted a position in Loveland, Colorado. That was a split position between teaching 4 classes at a middle school named Walt Clark Middle School and being the assistant director at Loveland High School, where I got to co-teach the jazz program. There were 2 jazz bands, a symphonic band, a wind ensemble, the marching band. And I worked with a master teacher, Cecil Gutierrez. And again, just so grateful for his mentorship. And so my first year was split between those 2 schools. And then my second year, I moved to become the full-time middle school band director and loved every moment of it. I was overjoyed teaching middle school, it turns out. I always thought I wanted to be a high school director, but in those years of teaching middle school, and in the end it was a total of 8 years teaching middle school, the idea of taking students from choosing an instrument and not even knowing how to put it together to working with them and developing them through their 8th grade year to be able to play at such a high level, advanced music, both in band music and in jazz band music, was just so rewarding. And so we had some incredible experiences at the middle school level. And then in 2005, I moved over to the high school position as the head band director of Loveland High School. And again, I grew so much in every time, taking over a job. And in both times, there were some resistance from students who were attached to their prior director and thought every way that it had been done before was the right way. And so it's not that every job went swimmingly in the beginning. There were definitely challenges that we went through. And at the high school level, that led to the creation of a leadership program, actually, because of the challenges as a high school band director. I'll give you a quick backstory, if that's all right.
Sure.
All right. So Loveland High School had just gone through some pretty big changes before I took over. The percussion instructor had quit on the band between semifinals and finals at the state championship, and gave an ultimatum to the percussionist at the semester and said, you can either stay in band or stay in my outside of school percussion group. And 28 out of the 30 percussionists quit band at semester.
Oh, wow.
And this is the year before I took over. And so the two band directors had to create a percussion section from scratch, and they took wind players and taught them how to play percussion and rebuilt the program. And then independently and simultaneously, the head band director and the assistant band director both decided that they were going to leave the high school. The head director decided he was going to retire from teaching high school, and the assistant director decided he was going to move to another district and become a junior high director. So the legend is that morning they both showed up to school, and one director said to the other, I have something to tell you. No, I have something to tell you. You go first. No, you go first. And they shared with each other that they were both planning on leaving. And I think that was February 2005. And so when I was offered the position the end of May, the program had just won the state championship 3 years in a row. And I took over this program with minimal marching band experience myself. And I was able to be part of the process of selecting our assistant director, who was fantastic. His name's Nick Peterson, and he had a wealth of marching band experience. So he was a huge help in teaching marching band. But nevertheless, there was a lack of trust with some of the older students, particularly the seniors, towards me with my limited marching background. And so there were elements of working against me and sabotaging purposely the program. And there was one day, two trombonists came to my office, Greg and Brad. They were junior and sophomore trombone section leaders. And they came to me and they said, Mr. Arau, we're really concerned about the future of the band. We're sick and tired of how some of the seniors are acting. What can we do about it? And I said, thank you for coming to talk to me. I'm so grateful, because I've been wondering the same thing. And I said, let's plan a meeting after school and let's talk about that very thing. What kind of band do we want to create? And a couple of days later, we had the first meeting, what eventually became the Leadership Symposium. And in that first meeting, I showed a video clip of Dr. Tim Lotzenheiser talking to a group of high school students about what it meant to be a servant leader. And that video was so contrary to what the style of leadership had been before. And it was a new idea for our students. And then it sparked a conversation about what kind of band could we create? What kind of culture do we want to create? And it gave students a voice. So we met every week for an hour, one day a week after school. And it began the process of transforming the culture. And it made its way into every aspect of the program. The performance level, particularly in the wind band area, elevated. The way students treated each other changed. The way the students acted at competitions, being super respectful of the other ensembles, regardless of the results. And it was amazing. So the Leadership Symposium was continued for the 7 years I was there. And the director who followed me continues it to this day. But the Leadership Symposium was so successful in changing the culture that down the line, other bands started asking me, how did you do that? And so then that led to me sharing these ideas of Leadership Symposium with others. The reason I bring that up is eventually I did go to University of Colorado Boulder and study conducting. And in my second year of studying there, I had a breakfast with my saxophone professor from Lawrence University. And I was catching up with him. We met in Denver, Colorado for breakfast. And I was telling him about my experiences over the last 15 years as a high school director and my beginnings of grad school. And at the very end of our conversation, I mentioned, oh, and I started this leadership program. And he paused and said, what? And I told him what it was. And he was so curious and so interested in this that he said, I'd love to have you come be a guest speaker at Lawrence University and talk with our music education students about student leadership. So I was brought to campus on the first weekend in February 2014. And I was able to guest teach a instrumental methods and rehearsal techniques course, and then be a guest on a panel where I shared these ideas of empowering students through leadership. And I talked about principles of Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, John Wooden's Pyramid of Success, and John C. Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership and its application to teaching music and student leadership. And that got the interest of many of the faculty and the dean of the conservatory. Well, it just happened that 2 months after I was there, the chair of music education decided to move to another university. And so there was a position opening at Lawrence, and they didn't have time to do a national search. So they needed to quickly hire a visiting professor. And just by sheer fortitude and luck and just, I guess the word is fortuitousness, that I'd been there, I was top of mind. And so I had an invitation from the dean to leave University of Colorado Boulder a year before my residency was over to become a visiting professor at my alma mater, which was a dream come true.
Wow. There's a lot there. So let me start with the most important thing that comes out of this, which is the leadership symposium. And I want to try to like maybe tease out something that people who are listening can use immediately with their programs. And so the one thing, I know a little bit about this, but if you can share with the listeners, what exactly is the difference between a servant leader and the type of leadership you had before that first meeting?
Sure. Yeah. And many elements go into that, but the common leadership was that the best players would become the leader. And there wasn't real training on how to be a leader. And so most students lead the way they were taught. And most students lead without training by telling others what to do. And they have this assumption that if they're given a leadership title, they now have the right, or maybe even the duty, to just tell others what to do, and others should just obey and do what they say. The challenge is, as we discover, particularly as we get older, and adults all know this, that just because we have a title doesn't necessarily mean that people will listen to us. And it's even more particularly true as a student leader when you really have no authority or power, because you can't hire or fire anybody, and your position is really granted to you by the good graces of the music teacher. And therefore, in order to be successful as a student leader, you need to find out a way to serve and help others first to earn their respect. And the adage that President Theodore Roosevelt said years ago, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care, matters so much for all leaders, but particularly student leaders. So when we come to leadership through a servant leadership perspective, we change our concept of what leadership means. Now, instead of telling others what to do, we lead others through leading by example, through encouraging and inspiring others to achieve their full potential, through lifting others, through inspiring, through doing the tasks that others wouldn't want to do, and we're the ones to do it first, and never asking somebody to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. And that's the first level of servant leadership. As we grow as a servant leader, we learn that when we can actually empower those that we're leading and ask them what they think we should work on, and eventually teaching them how to teach and giving them opportunities to lead, now a leader's leading new leaders. And you see your role as a leader as creating the next generation of leaders. So when you're working with a freshman or a new music student, you are remembering what it was like to be in their position. So you are filled with compassion and empathy, but you also recognize that it's up to you to provide the strategies. And if they don't understand something at first, you got to find a new way to teach. And so a strong part of the training program is how to teach others to lead. In the past, many directors would send maybe their drum majors or some of their other top leaders to a leadership camp for a couple of days and assume that the students know how to lead, and then they'll come back to their program without reinforcing leadership concepts. So what I advocated in my session at the Midwest Clinic in 2014 called Leadership Matters, I advocated making sure that leadership was an emphasis or a focus of the program, just as much as tuning is an important part of the program, because to build a strong culture, we need to build a strong leadership program. And leadership is the great lifter, just as a rising tide lifts all boats.
Do you have any advice for that teacher who goes into the new position and there's a marching band and maybe they don't have a lot of marching band experience, or there's a jazz program, they don't have a lot of jazz experience? What do they do? How do they overcome that? I mean, other than what we know is experience and learning, but how do they gain the trust of the students?
Yeah, and that absolutely is a challenge. It's a real challenge, but again, it can be something that becomes an opportunity for personal growth, and sometimes a challenge can become your strength if you really, really focus on it. So the first thing that came to mind is ask for help.
Yeah.
Ask for help. Ask for help. And I absolutely did that with marching. I, first of all, was able to bring in an assistant director, and I know that not everybody can do that. I was able to bring in some outstanding staff members to join the marching band staff. And I know not every program has the financial resources to be able to do that. But the next thing I did was I met with the head band director at CSU Fort Collins at the time, Colorado State University, Fort Collins. And his name is Dr. Stephen Moore. And Stephen Moore had been an incredibly successful high school band director in Kentucky and had built the CSU Fort Collins marching band program from a smaller program into a thriving program. And I spent a day with Stephen Moore, just picking his brain. And as a mentor, he was invaluable to me. And I would bring in a guest for a fundraiser called the Marchathon. And I always try to bring in one of the top marching band pedagogues to teach. And I just constantly learn from them. And so again, asking for help, mentorship, then accessing, there's more and more resources for us now. There's the dynamic marching band video series that's available now to learn from. Going to other high school programs that are successful and being humble and filled with humility and putting our ego aside and just saying like, hey, I'm really here to learn. Where do I get started? And I think the adage that great leaders surround themselves with people that know more than them in areas that they don't know as much, like find complementary people to build up our strengths. Nobody knows everything. And as soon as we can admit that and be humble and filled with humility and put our ego aside, I think that's where true growth begins.
So Matthew, can you share the YouTube video that you did?
Yeah, a few years ago, I was interviewed at the Conn-Selmer Institute, where I teach every summer, about my presentation titled Unlocking Potential, the Impact of Mindset on Success. And I'm passionate about growth mindset and all of the research that's been done on talent. From the Talent Code, talent is overrated, and the 10,000 hour rule, the works of Anders Ericsson, and his work, Peak, the New Science of Expertise. And I was interviewed about these topics, and a 3-minute video has been created called Believe in Students. So if you go to YouTube, write my name, Matthew Arau, Believe in Students, it'll come up, and it has the Canadian brass playing music in the background. And I'll share the principles in a really quick, concise way to help others understand growth and fixed mindset, and the idea that talent is merely a collection of skills layered upon layer, and that we should focus on skills and actually avoid even using the word talent, because talent is recognized after the hard work, not before. And skills can be learned and skills can be taught. And that's what we do as teachers, is teach the students in front of us and help them learn skills.
So Matthew, we've done a lot of talking about your experience, especially in leadership, but you're also on the conducting faculty at ABC and you conduct bands at Lawrence University. And I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about conducting and perhaps some of the work you've done to bring new music in commissions and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I view the role of the conductor as bringing great music to life from the inspiration of the composer. And so I actually view the conductor as an advocate for the composer and an advocate for the creation of new music to further the literature for what we do as wind band conductors. So for a long time, I've been involved in commissioning composers, beginning with my younger brother, Javier Arau. He wrote a work for my middle school band called Andalusian Legend. And as a high school director, I was part of the commissioning project for Hold This Boy and Listen by Carter Pan. And it was a fabulous experience having Carter come to Loveland from Boulder to spend a rehearsal with us on that work. And there was one day where Stephen Bryant spent a couple hours with my high school. It was a real highlight early in my career as a high school director. I met Stephen Bryant at the Western International Band Clinic, and Dusk had just been premiered, and it was by Langley High School, and Langley High School was performing Dusk. So I met Stephen Bryant there, and we really connected. So a year or two later, he was coming to Colorado as a guest for CSU Fort Collins. He called me up and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in town." And I said, "Great." And I think I bought like every work Stephen Bryant had composed up to that point. And we rehearsed about 3 of his pieces with him, which was amazing for my students to have the composer in the room with them. As a graduate student at University of Colorado Boulder, where I did my DMA in conducting, I was part of commissions for Carter Pan's 3 Embraces, which was composed for Alan McMurray's farewell concert, and With Wings Like Eagles by Daniel Kellogg, also on the composition faculty at University of Colorado Boulder. And while at Lawrence University, I've championed composers as well. Teresa Martin is a fabulous composer. We performed Radiance by her, and she was a guest at our rehearsal. The commission that I'm the most proud of is for a piece called Samai Raga for Wind Ensemble by Akash Mittal. And I'm so excited about this piece because it brings music from the Hindustani culture to wind band. And it's composed using 4 different ragas, one for each time of the day. Begins with Bairagi, movement 1, it's a morning raga, and then there's a monsoon raga called Meghmalar, and then the evening raga is Yaman, and then the midnight raga is the 4th movement, Malkans. And this conversation with Akash Mittal goes back a few years, but our relationship goes back even further. And I met Akash when he was about 14, 15 years old, when he was a saxophonist in Loveland, Colorado, and he came to me for saxophone lessons. And it was just it's amazing to think about our pathways in life. And when we meet people, you never know where we'll all end up. But we've stayed in communication all these years. He is now a professional musician and music teacher in New York City. But along the way, he applied for grants to study in India, and his father's from India. So he's half Indian, half Hindustani. And he spent 2 separate years studying music in India with master musicians. And he began fusing Indian or Hindustani music with jazz years ago, and actually has won some awards for his compositions in jazz. So a few years ago, we started talking about the possibility of writing a piece based on ragas for wind ensemble. And the idea grew and grew, and he sent me his first draft. And I remember there was barely any percussion at all. And I said, you should try to utilize more percussion. He kept sending me drafts, and this idea grew and grew and grew. And we decided to create a consortium for this commissioning project, because I thought, here's an idea whose time has come, and Akash is going to be leading the way of bringing authentic Hindustani music to wind ensemble. And the consortium includes some fabulous universities, the Brooklyn Wind Ensemble, and some outstanding high schools, and including University of Sydney as well. So we did the premiere performance in March 2019. And Akash came out to Lawrence University. The Lawrence University Symphonic Band did the premiere, but we had 2 full days with Akash as an artist in residence, an incredible 2-hour rehearsal where he taught us the ragas with solfege, and the groups were singing it back and forth. And the piece only uses notes from the raga and rhythms authentically from the raga. So there's no influence of Western harmony, which makes this piece unique and different from most works that have included ragas and Hindustani music. And in the end, there's tons of percussion, and it's incredible. And there were people in the audience from India that were brought to tears, because there's moments in the work that really authentically create the sound of the big cities in India, and it really brought them back home. I think it's a really important piece, and I hope more and more people come to play it.
Matthew, this has been a really great conversation so far, and I want to ask you the final questions I ask of all my guests. And so the first of these is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I think that is a really important question. As a former competitive high school marching band director, I've seen healthy competition and unhealthy competition. And creating a culture of healthy competition was very, very important to me, and led me to teaching the ideas of the great basketball coach, John Wooden, to my students. And John Wooden had a definition of success, which wasn't about what the score was on the scoreboard. It wasn't about winning. It was about the individual knowing whether or not they gave 100% when it counted. And you could win or you could lose on the scoreboard, but only you knew if you were a success. And making success about personal effort and personal growth and personal achievement changed what the focus was on. For our band, when I was in the competitive arena, it was never about beating another school or winning. We always made it about, how can we take our performance from where we are now and taking it to a higher level? And if we did have a struggle, what can we learn from it? Now, in the end, there were times when the group did receive the accolades, and we won the state championship and won the 2A Bands of America Super Regional at San Antonio, Texas, and had those achievements and of recognition as the featured group at the Western International Band Clinic with our wind ensemble, or multiple performances at the State Music Educators Conference. But it was never about winning. It was always about the feeling of giving it your all. And for me as a marching band director, one of the highlights was circling up after a performance and talking with the students about the performance and how it felt, the emotional feeling and expression that happened on the field, and the energy and the effort. And that's what meant the most to me and to the students, much more than the results. There were bands in the state that focused on beating other schools, but we were never like that. For us, it was about, how can we create the greatest work of art on the field? And I think when you make it about that, rather than about taking home the trophy, then your focus is on the right things. It's on expressing and moving people, and you're finding purpose and meaning in what we're doing. You're going to spend hundreds of hours, thousands of hours at times with your marching band show. Choose music that is built on unbelievable, life-changing, quality music with purpose and meaning behind the show that can transform, literally change people's lives when they see your performance. To me, that's so much more important than making it about winning or beating somebody else.
How did you find, or how do you find, a work-life balance in a career as a music teacher, music educator?
I think this is one of those ongoing challenges. I think let's start with loving what you do. Let's start with loving what we do and finding joy in what we do every day, and beginning the day with focusing on gratitude. It's actually something I've been focusing on myself, is waking up in the morning and choosing my first thoughts, and to think about, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky to get to do what I get to do. I focus on what I get to do. It's a difference, isn't it? Not what I have to do. It's what I get to do.
Sure is.
I literally breathe in gratitude and focus on the kind of day I want to create. And I think it begins there. I think so much of it is our internal thinking of what we choose to think about. Our attitude changes everything. And it's an approach to rehearsing even. So I think sometimes people think balance is going to be like, okay, 50% music, 25% leisure, 25% this, I'm going to sleep in there, blah, blah, blah. But I think it begins with finding joy in what we do, and then making sure that we create quality time for those people in our life that are closest to us. For me, it's spending quality time with my wife, Mary Lee, and spending quality time with friends, and investing in people like they are the most important person in the room when I'm talking with them. And I think giving to others is a way to give back. As the more we give, the more we get. And that focus on others, I think, helps us appreciate our life. For me, meditation in the morning is really important. I also swim daily and do a series of yoga stretches. I read every day. Works for personal growth and personal development. I find that reading is one of my aspects of balance. I enjoy reading. It lifts me up and shares new ways for me to look at the world. And I also love score studies. So to me, a lot of what I get to do doesn't feel like work. So maybe it's about finding enough time for all the things that I love to do, and finding sometimes I don't have time to do everything I'd love to do in the day. But finding joy in the moment and focusing on what I'm appreciative of has been a way to really help me. I also find myself on airplanes a lot, traveling a lot. And fortunately, I enjoy traveling and find joy in meeting others on a plane, or having the opportunity to read a book, or to prepare a presentation, or to journal, which I also journal daily, and to stay connected with others. So I don't know that I find like a 50-50 balance, but I found that changing my mindset and focusing on gratitude, joy, and compassion has changed my stress levels and anxiety, and how I feel about my opportunity to live each day, making music and working with others.
All right, Matthew, this is a very big question. My guests tend to answer it whatever is most on their mind at the time. And so what are the challenges facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
Right. I think in recent years, there's been a lot of thought about how we educate musically, what we focus on. There's been articles over the years even on the role of the large ensemble in music education. And I want to focus on what we do really, really well. And what we do really, really well is we provide music education to students in America. And most countries do not provide opportunities for studying music within the school day. So let's begin with that and appreciate that. Now, I know there's also massive inequity in the amount of funding that goes into music education. It varies from community to community. And I believe that music teaches so many important things that our society needs now more than ever. And I believe that when we teach music intentionally to create bridges, to break down walls, to enlighten us about other cultures and experiences, that music can take us back in time to appreciate a world that we don't even have an opportunity to live in, but by a composer who lived 200, 300 years ago, we can experience that time. I think music is a superpower that should be shared and celebrated. I think that music is a birthright, and that every student in America has the right to a music education. And I think that instrumental music needs to continue to champion composers from different cultures and underrepresented groups, and that we can broaden our offerings to include music from other cultures, including mariachi has become really important to me as well. Recently, I was the keynote speaker at the San Diego International Mariachi Summit and had the opportunity to hear youth mariachi groups from San Diego and Tucson, Arizona. And it was incredible to see what's happening. And so I think we can even broaden our instrumental offerings in school to include music beyond band. But within band, I think if we're intentional about teaching beyond the notes, using music as a vehicle to learn about humanity, history, culture, about the creation and composition of music, the why pieces are composed, choosing pieces with deep meaning that have depth and emotional background, and being courageous about our musical selections, and then striving to have the performances be more than just the standard performance, make it an event that can be transformative for the audience by engaging the audience in the performance itself.
Absolutely. I'm going to be self-referential and bring up my interview with Chris Gleason, who's a big advocate of the comprehensive musicianship idea. He's in Wisconsin, as you know. And he talked about this idea when he did Brian Balmage's Moscow 1941.
I'll share two experiences that had to do with going beyond the notes. One was the performance of an American Elegy by Frank DeKelly at Lawrence University. And it's fascinating to think that the Columbine shootings, which this piece is that's the springboard for the creation of the work. It's really a piece about hope by Frank DeKelly. But April 20th, 1999 is when Columbine happened, and that's just an hour away from where I was teaching. And Bill Biskup was the band director there, and he was fortunate enough to be off campus during the shootings. His son, Brent Biskup, became my student teacher at Walt Clark Middle School, and Brent Biskup is now the band director at Flower Mound. And so American Elegy has a very special place in my heart. Alan McMurray, led the commission. He had guest conducted my high school performing American Elegy. And when we did American Elegy at Lawrence University, it was important for me to have the students, one, have the experience of singing in 4-part harmony, the alma mater that Frank DeKelly had arranged for Columbine High School. And so we learned to sing that, and we sang it at the concert. And also for my students to think about their own elegy, their own American Elegy, their own challenges in their life. Because it turned out that my students don't remember Columbine. It's 1999. But sadly, since then, there's been many other tragedies that our students have experienced. And so I had my students write down their own personal elegies, and it was really challenging for me to read some of my students' hardships that they'd gone through in their own lives. Like one student's home had burned down to the ground, and he wrote about that loss. And I had a student share one of the things he wrote about that was so moving. He actually spoke at the concert. And in the performance, we had this student introduce the piece and read. It was almost poetry that he had written. And then my students stood up and sang the alma mater. And during the performance of an American Elegy, we had different solo lines during the canon, stand up one at a time. It was like one student at a time standing up, ultimately the whole band standing up when the phrase happens, "We all are Columbine." And when the piece ended, we invited the audience. They had the words and the music in the program. We invited the audience to stand up and sing the alma mater with us. And we had the entire Lawrence Memorial Chapel singing the Columbine alma mater. And I turned around and conducted the audience, and it was so moving. And yeah, just amazing.
If I could give you a time machine and have you go back to your high school graduation, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself?
If I could go back in time and talk to myself after graduation, I would say, take more time to smell the roses. Take more time to appreciate and truly connect heart to heart with people. That life's not a race. That it's not all about getting the highest grades and it's not all about achievement. It's life's about compassion and making a difference in other people's lives. And I think if at a younger age I had been able to talk to myself, I would say, don't be so stressed out. Relax. It's gonna be okay, and enjoy the now, enjoy the moment. I feel like I was so goal oriented, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I mean, it led me to practice incredibly high amounts and to grow as a musician, and I think that's part of development. But just sometimes slow down and spend time with people, getting to know them, and have patience.
If you had a choice, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band that you would conduct, and why?
I think the works that have moved me, some of the incredible lyrical works that have been so moving, some of the incredible chamber pieces like Strauss Serenade for 13 instruments that have just been some of the great joys of conducting. But for me, I think the most influential and work that I never get tired of, that I find something new in every time, is still Lincolnshire Percy Grainger. And I've had the opportunity to conduct that a few times now, and I find new depth and something new every day that I conduct it.
Grainger remains the undisputed champion of this question.
Yeah, I'd like to be, also, a champion for the new composers as well. And I really feel like where we are with band and wind compositions is just this incredible explosion of wonderful composers writing for wind ensemble. So ask me in 10 years and I hope to, maybe say a living composer.
Matthew, is there anything coming up that you would like to share or promote?
All right. Well, life is so exciting. It just seems every day there's amazing things happening. Recently, I was published by C. Allen Publications for a transcription of a work for wind octet for flute, oboe, 2 clarinets, 2 horns, and 2 bassoons. And it recreates a work by Charles Lefebvre that had been lost to posterity. It had been premiered by the Paul Taffanel Wind Chamber Society in Paris in 1887, and the original work was lost. The only thing remaining was an organ transcription by Alexander Gilmont that he did of the original work. And this was an area that I spent a lot of time studying in my doctorate degree. My dissertation is on the wind works of the Taffanel Society. And I found some works that were lost or forgotten that are incredible works. And so one of my drives is to bring those works back to life. And so I reverse transcribed the organ transcription to recreate what I hope is very close to what would have been the original wind octet. And so it's a 7-minute work. It's a lyrical work that about grade 4.5 that I think musicians at the high school and collegiate and professional level will find great joy in performing. So I'm really excited about that. Other things that are coming up, I have some travels that are coming up. Actually, this coming week, I'll be traveling to Singapore, where I'll be teaching leadership at the Youth Art Leadership Conference, sponsored by the Wind Bands Association of Singapore. There will be 400 14 to 15-year-old band students. And over a 4-day period, I'll get to teach student leadership alongside my friend Frank Troika. So that'll be incredible. And then one event coming up I'm super excited about is to conduct an honor band in Australia, in Brisbane, Australia. And that's just incredible. So I'm just super excited for that. It's 3 days of rehearsal and then a concert. It'll be early October, my first time in Australia. So very excited to be a part of that. And let me see, what else can I share? I have the keynote address at the National NAFME conference for all of the National Honor Ensembles on November 9. I'm really excited to be talking to 550 incredible high school musicians representing the All-Nation Band, Orchestra, Choir, Jazz, Guitar Ensemble, and Modern Band Ensemble. So that'll be a highlight coming up. And there's an article by Make Music that is going to be published called Upbeat, Creating a Positive Culture in Music, coming out in September or October. So look for that. And my wife and I just created a company, Upbeat Global LLC. So be looking for my new website eventually called www.upbeatglobal.com. That'll be a landing space for all of my conducting work, leadership work, professional development work. And it's going to be a way to help teachers and students and organizations lift their upbeat and just create a space where we recognize that our thoughts are our upbeats to our actions and that we can choose our thoughts and therefore create the culture that we want and choose our destiny. So I'm really excited about sharing those things. And it's just, like you said, it's quite the balancing act, but I'm fortunate to find joy in everything that I get to do, from the dream of my life to teach at Lawrence University, my alma mater, and to be a consumer education clinician, to be part of the American Band College conducting faculty, to work at the Western International Band Clinic. And at the end of this year, it'll be 26 states and 4 continents that I will have had the opportunity to speak and teach or conduct in. So I guess I pinch myself every day, and I'm just grateful for the life I have.
How can people get in touch with you, Matthew?
I have an active Facebook page, so feel free to reach out and contact me on Facebook. And eventually my website will be created, beatglobal.com. And feel free to contact me via email. I'll give you 2 emails. One is matthewarau@gmail. So it's mattthewarau@gmail.com. Or my Lawrence University email is matthew.r.arau@lawrence.edu, LAWRENCE. I can also be reached through contacting the Consumer Education Clinician page. If you just do a search for Consumer Education Clinician Matthew Arau, it'll take you to the bio page for me, where you can request me as a clinician and learn a little bit more about the clinics that I give. Just multiple ways. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, so I'd love to connect with people that are interested in the conversation. So I love growing and learning from everybody that I cross paths with.
All right, Matthew, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a real pleasure and honor to speak with you today, Mark. Thank you for having me.